Alex had always considered himself a fortunate man. His career was thriving, his home was warm and inviting, and his marriage to Emma was the cornerstone of his happiness. For 10 years, they built a life together filled with shared dreams and mutual trust. From their modest beginnings to their current, comfortable lifestyle, everything seemed perfect, or so Alex thought. Their mornings were routine but comforting. Emma would be in the kitchen, her soft hum filling the air as she prepared breakfast. Alex would sit at the table, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the scent of toast. He often glanced at her with a sense of pride and love. Emma was his anchor, the one person he believed would always be by his side. Yet, lately, something felt different. It wasn't one glaring issue, but a series of subtle changes. Emma seemed distracted, her laughter less spontaneous, her touch more distant. Alex dismissed it as work stress. After all, Emma had recently taken on a more demanding role, and he understood the pressures that came with it. Then there were the texts. Alex first noticed them during a quiet evening at home. They were watching one of their favorite shows when Emma's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, smiled faintly, and quickly placed the phone face down on the table. Alex felt a pang of curiosity, but he brushed it off. He trusted Emma. But as the days went by, the frequency of those messages increased. Emma would excuse herself to take calls in another room. When Alex asked who it was, her answers were vague. Work colleagues, she'd say, or friends from her book club. Still, something gnawed at him. Their once vibrant conversations grew shorter. Emma's laughter, which used to brighten their evenings, felt rehearsed. The warmth that defined their relationship was slowly replaced by an invisible barrier. Alex couldn't pinpoint when it began, but the distance between them was undeniable. One evening, at a neighborhood gathering, Alex observed Emma closely. She seemed more animated than usual, her eyes sparkling as she engaged with others. It wasn't until she received another text that Alex's suspicions deepened. He noticed how she quickly glanced at her phone, her lips curling into a smile she didn't share with him. The moment was brief, but Alex felt the sting of uncertainty. "Everything okay?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, just a message from work," she replied, slipping her phone into her purse. Her tone was light, but her body language told a different story. Alex tried to shake off his unease, convincing himself that he was overreacting. He wanted to believe that their love was as strong as ever, but the signs kept piling up. Emma began working late more frequently. Business trips became more common. She was always busy, always preoccupied. Alex noticed how she guarded her phone, keeping it close even when she didn't need to. Once, he caught her hurriedly closing her laptop as he entered the room. "Just work stuff," she said, smiling, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of guilt. It was then that Alex began questioning everything. He replayed moments in his mind. The unexplained absences, the secretive texts, the emotional distance. The woman he once knew so well now felt like a stranger. Despite his growing doubts, Alex held back. He didn't want to accuse Emma without proof. He cherished their history, their life together. But the doubt was a relentless whisper in his mind, growing louder with each passing day. The turning point came when Emma announced a weekend work trip. "It's a conference in the city," she said nonchalantly, avoiding his gaze. "I'll be back Sunday evening." Alex nodded, but inside, something shifted. He couldn't ignore the nagging feeling any longer. This wasn't just a hunch. There was something she wasn't telling him. As Emma packed her bags, Alex watched her carefully. He wanted to believe her, but his instincts screamed otherwise. This wasn't the woman he married, at least not the woman he thought he knew. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced with questions. Who was she texting? Why was she distant? What was she hiding? The answers felt close, yet just out of reach. By morning, Alex made a decision. He needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Alex sat at the kitchen table, staring at his untouched coffee. The scent, once comforting, now churned his stomach. Emma had left for her conference just hours ago, but the weight of suspicion gnawed at him. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Denial, anger, betrayal. He wanted to believe her, but the clues were too many, too blatant to ignore anymore. Determined to find answers, Alex began his search. He started with Emma's laptop, which he had left behind. His hands trembled as he opened it, feeling a pang of guilt for invading her privacy. Yet, the need for the truth outweighed his hesitation. He sifted through her emails and documents, but everything seemed normal. Just as he was about to close it, he noticed a folder labeled Work, Confidential. His heart pounded as he clicked it open. Inside were files related to her job, but one file caught his eye. A series of emails with a contact saved under the initials RM. The subject lines were vague. Meeting notes, follow-up, thank you. But something felt off. He clicked one, reading through the seemingly innocent words. Then he noticed subtle details, informal greetings, inside jokes, and an unusual level of familiarity. Scrolling further, he found emails with attachments. His hands shook as he opened them. Photos from dinners, trips, and private moments that were clearly not work-related. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Emma wasn't at a conference. She was with someone else. Alex closed the laptop, breathing heavily. His mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Who was RM? Why had she done this to him? Feeling overwhelmed, Alex reached out to his best friend, Mark. They had known each other since college, and Mark was the one person Alex trusted implicitly. Hey man, can we talk? Alex's voice was strained. Mark sensed something was wrong. Of course. Come over. At Mark's house, Alex poured his heart out, recounting everything he had discovered. Mark listened intently, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief. Are you sure about this? Mark asked cautiously. Alex nodded. I saw the emails, the photos. She's with someone else right now. Mark leaned back, exhaling deeply. I don't even know what to say. Have you confronted her? Not yet. I don't know if I should. Part of me wants to wait until she comes back and see if she'll lie to my face again, Alex admitted, his voice shaking with anger. Mark placed a hand on Alex's shoulder. Look, you need to decide what you want out of this. Do you want to fix things, or is it over? Because either way, this will get messy. I don't even know what I want, Alex confessed. I just feel broken. Mark nodded. Take it one step at a time. But don't let this consume you. You need clarity before you act. The advice helped, but only slightly. The next few days were torture. Alex oscillated between rage and heartbreak, each emotion intensifying his need for answers. He became obsessed with finding out more. He dug deeper, going through Emma's social media accounts, her call logs, and even her calendar. Everything pointed to a carefully concealed affair. He discovered that RM was Ryan Miller, a colleague Emma had mentioned in passing months ago. At the time, Alex hadn't thought much of it. Now, it felt like a dagger through his heart. The boiling point came when Alex received a text from Emma. Conference is going well. Miss you. Can't wait to see you Sunday. His hands clenched around his phone. The audacity of her lies was infuriating. He typed back a curt response. Miss you too. Be safe. But inside, he was seething. He couldn't believe how easily she lied, how effortlessly she maintained the facade. The final straw came on Saturday evening. Alex received a call from an unknown number. Hesitant, he answered. Hello? Is this Alex? A woman's voice asked. Yes, who's this? My name is Rachel. I'm Ryan Miller's wife. Alex's blood ran cold. What do you want? I think you know why I'm calling, Rachel said, her voice tight with emotion. I found out about your wife and my husband. I thought you should know. Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Alex's worst fears were confirmed. How long? He finally managed to ask. 6 months, Rachel replied. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to face the truth. Alex felt a wave of nausea. Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry, Rachel said softly before hanging up. Alex sat in stunned silence. The betrayal was deeper than he'd imagined. He wasn't just dealing with a cheating spouse. There were others affected, other lives shattered. By the time Emma returned on Sunday evening, Alex was ready. But he wasn't sure what he'd do next. Every option, confrontation, separation, or forgiveness, felt unbearable. He stood in the living room, waiting as Emma walked through the door, her usual smile plastered across her face. Hey, she said cheerfully, dropping her bag by the door. Miss me? Alex stared at her, his heart pounding. We need to talk. Emma's smile faltered. What's wrong? He took a deep breath, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. I know about Ryan. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, Alex saw genuine fear in her expression. Emma froze, her smile vanishing as her breath caught in her throat. For a split second, she appeared to be calculating her options, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. But there was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide from the truth that Alex had laid bare. Ryan, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about, Alex said, his voice calm but laced with simmering fury. I know everything, Emma. The emails, the photos, the trips. Rachel called me. Emma's face turned pale, her eyes widening in shock. She stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the couch for support. Rachel? Yes, Alex continued, stepping closer. Ryan's wife. She knows. I know. So, don't bother lying to me anymore. For a moment, there was silence, thick and suffocating, hanging between them like a chasm. Emma opened her mouth, then closed it, as though words had failed her. Finally, she sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I was going to tell you, she mumbled through her fingers. Alex laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Tell me? When? After the next conference? Or maybe when he left his wife and moved in with you? His voice cracked with the weight of his pain. Emma lifted her head, her eyes shimmering with tears. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Like what, Emma? Alex snapped, his voice rising. You didn't mean to destroy our marriage? You didn't mean to lie to my face every day? I didn't want to hurt you, she cried, standing up, her hands trembling. Well, you did. Alex roared, the dam of his emotions finally breaking. You tore us apart. Do you even realize what you've done? Or were you too busy sneaking around with him? Emma flinched, her tears streaming down her cheeks. It wasn't just sneaking around. I was lonely, Alex. You were always working late, distant. I felt invisible. Invisible? Alex echoed, his voice dripping with disbelief. I was working late to give us a better life. I was doing it for us, Emma. For you. And this is how you repay me? Emma shook her head, sobbing uncontrollably. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But it wasn't just physical, it was emotional. He listened to me in ways you never did. Her words sliced through Alex like a knife. His mind reeled, memories flashing. Nights he stayed late at the office, thinking he was being a good husband. Had he really neglected her that much? He gritted his teeth, trying to push away any semblance of guilt. So, what now? Alex asked, his voice quieter, but still burning with anger. Are you going to run to him? Or do you actually want to fix this mess you made? Emma hesitated, her eyes filled with desperation. I want to fix it. I love you, Alex. I was stupid, and I made the worst mistake of my life. Please, give me a chance to make it right. Alex stared at her, his mind torn between rage and the faint, painful hope that she meant it. His fists clenched as he struggled with the enormity of the decision before him. I can't just forget this, he said after a long pause. I can't just erase what you did. I'm not asking you to forget, Emma whispered, stepping closer. I'm asking you to let me prove to you that I can be better, that we can be better. Her plea hung in the air, and Alex felt the weight of it pressing down on him. His heart ached, but his mind screamed at him to walk away, to end this madness. But then, he thought of everything they'd built, their life, their home, their memories. Could he really throw it all away? You want me to trust you again? Alex's voice was hoarse. Yes, Emma said, nodding furiously. I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. Alex closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. His chest heaved as he wrestled with the conflicting emotions. Every fiber of his being wanted to lash out, to break something, to walk away. But beneath the anger was the faintest glimmer of something else. Hope, or maybe just exhaustion. I'll think about it, he said finally, his voice cold but steady. But I'm not promising anything. Emma nodded, wiping her tears. Thank you for even considering it. Without another word, Alex walked past her, heading for the door. He needed air. He needed space. He stepped outside into the night, breathing deeply, letting the cool breeze wash over him. Inside, Emma collapsed onto the couch, sobbing quietly. She knew she had just one chance to prove herself, and Alex, standing under the vast, star-filled sky, knew that whatever happened next would define the rest of their lives. The morning after the confrontation was eerily silent. The sun rose over a house that no longer felt like home. Alex sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of coffee he hadn't touched. His mind raced with fragments of the night before. Emma's tear-streaked face, her desperate pleas, and his own conflicted emotions. He hadn't slept. Instead, he spent the night pacing the living room, trying to make sense of everything. How did it come to this? How did the woman he once trusted with his life become the source of his deepest betrayal? The sound of footsteps broke the silence. Emma appeared in the doorway, her eyes swollen and red. She hesitated, clutching a tissue, unsure if she should speak. "I made an appointment with a counselor," she said softly, breaking the tension. "For both of us, if you're willing." Alex didn't respond immediately. He wanted to feel anger, but all that remained was a hollow ache. He nodded, not because he was ready to forgive, but because he needed clarity, answers. Emma exhaled, visibly relieved. "Thank you," she whispered, retreating back into the hallway. After she left, Alex's phone buzzed. It was a message from his sister, Rachel. "I'm here for you. Let's talk when you're ready." He closed his eyes, grateful for her support. Rachel had been through her own marital troubles and knew the pain he was feeling. Alex decided to visit her later that day. Rachel greeted Alex with a tight hug, holding him longer than usual. Her warmth was comforting, but her concern was palpable. They sat on her porch, sipping iced tea in the warm afternoon sun. "I'm sorry, Alex," Rachel began. "I should have told you sooner. I didn't want to believe it myself." Alex shook his head. "It's not your fault. I needed to find out, but now I don't know what to do." Rachel placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to decide everything today, but whatever you do, make sure it's for you. Not for Emma, not for appearances, but for your peace." Her words resonated. For so long, Alex had put others first. Emma, his job, their life together. But where had that left him? He had lost himself in the process. Over the following weeks, Alex found himself adopting a new routine. He took time off work, focusing instead on rediscovering who he was outside of his marriage. He began running in the mornings, using the physical exertion to clear his mind. The solitude was therapeutic, allowing him to process his emotions without judgment. Emma, on the other hand, immersed herself in therapy. She respected Alex's space, only communicating when necessary. Their interactions were polite but distant, like two strangers sharing the same house. Friends and family noticed the change. Some expressed support, while others questioned Alex's decision to stay in the same house. His best friend, Mark, was the most vocal. "Man, I don't get it," Mark said one evening over beers. "You caught her cheating, and she gets counseling? She should be packing her bags." Alex sighed, swirling his drink. "It's not that simple. I'm not staying for her. I'm staying to figure out if I can move past this. Leaving now would be easy, but would it be right?" Mark shook his head but didn't press further. He knew Alex was stubborn once he made up his mind. As weeks turned into months, Alex noticed subtle changes in himself. He was no longer consumed by anger. Instead, he felt a strange sense of detachment, as though the affair had forced him to reevaluate his entire life. He started journaling, pouring his thoughts onto paper. It became a ritual, each entry helping him untangle the web of emotions he'd been trapped in. He wrote about his pain, his doubts, and surprisingly, his hopes. Emma, too, seemed different. She attended every counseling session, both individually and with Alex. Her sincerity was evident, but Alex remained cautious. Trust was no longer something he gave freely. One evening, Rachel invited Alex and Emma to dinner. It was the first time they'd been out together since the confrontation. The atmosphere was tense but civil. Emma spoke little, clearly aware of the unspoken judgment from Rachel and her husband. After dinner, Rachel pulled Alex aside. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive her," she admitted, "but I see how hard she's trying. The question is, do you see it?" Alex didn't answer immediately. He looked over at Emma, who was nervously helping clean up. "I see it," he said quietly, "but I don't know if it's enough." Rachel nodded. "Then take your time. But don't forget to ask yourself what you need." That night, Alex sat alone in their living room, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. He felt a strange mix of sadness and acceptance. The life they had built was fractured, but it wasn't beyond repair. Not yet. He realized that his journey wasn't just about deciding whether to stay or leave. It was about finding himself, reclaiming his identity, and ensuring that whatever path he chose, he did so with clarity and strength. For the first time in months, Alex felt a sliver of peace. He wasn't healed, and he wasn't whole, but he was finally moving forward. Months had passed since the confrontation, and although the house was no longer the same, it had started to feel less like a battleground and more like a space for healing. Alex had come to terms with the fact that the life he had once known was gone, forever altered by the truth he had uncovered. But in the midst of the pain, he had also begun to rebuild, not just the life he had with Emma, but his sense of self. The decision he had struggled with for so long had been made, not in a dramatic moment, but over time. Slowly, like the quiet unfolding of a story he never thought he would be part of. He had chosen to stay, not because Emma had asked for forgiveness, or because they had fixed everything, but because he had decided to rediscover who he was, independent of the role he had once played in their marriage. It was a cool autumn morning when Alex woke up with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in months. He looked out the window at the changing leaves, vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows. The world outside seemed to mirror the shift inside of him. He had spent so much time navigating the pain, but now he was learning how to live with it and to move forward. Emma was already up, her usual routine resumed. She looked up from the kitchen counter as Alex entered the room. Her eyes were tired, but they held something else, a deep acknowledgement of everything they had been through. "Good morning," she said quietly. Alex nodded, his voice steady. "Morning." They hadn't spoken much in recent weeks. Their relationship had shifted, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It had become a space for reflection, for both of them to understand that no amount of words could undo what had been done. Instead, they had found a new rhythm, a cautious understanding that change was inevitable and that they both had to evolve. Over the next few months, the emotional distance between them began to feel less like a wall and more like a space to breathe. Emma continued her counseling, and so did Alex, though he chose to do so on his own. His therapist had helped him understand that his anger and resentment were no longer his primary driving forces. It was his ability to forgive, not just Emma, but himself, that would ultimately set him free. One evening, after dinner, Emma asked Alex to sit with her. "I know it hasn't been easy, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I'm still here. I'm working on myself, and I hope we can still work through this, even if it takes time." Alex looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that for the first time in a long while, he wasn't trying to convince himself of anything. He wasn't forcing a feeling or an outcome. He simply understood that forgiveness didn't have to mean a return to what once was. It meant freeing himself from the chains of anger and betrayal that had once bound him. "I'm not sure what the future holds," he said softly, "but I'm willing to take things one day at a time. For me." For the first time in months, Emma smiled, though it was small, tentative. "That's all I can ask for." As weeks turned into months, Alex found his life slowly reshaping itself. He reconnected with old friends, pursued passions he had long set aside, and found comfort in activities that grounded him. His once empty house began to feel like a home again, not because the past was erased, but because he had learned to live with it, rather than be consumed by it. Emma, too, had changed. Her commitment to therapy was not just about mending their marriage. It was about understanding herself and her actions. The shame she carried was something she could never fully erase, but she was learning how to deal with it. Slowly, she began to trust again, both in herself and in Alex's ability to forgive, even if their relationship would never be the same. Alex knew there was no going back, but he was no longer trapped in the anger or sadness that had once consumed him. He had learned the true meaning of resilience, not in how he had reacted to Emma's betrayal, but in how he had learned to rise from it, stronger and more self-assured. As the seasons changed, so did Alex. He began to understand the most profound lesson of all: betrayal doesn't define you. It reveals who you are and what you're capable of surviving. Trust, he had learned, was fragile, but forgiveness was powerful. He had to forgive Emma, yes, but more importantly, he had to forgive himself. For the times he had ignored his own needs, for the moments he had allowed his identity to be shaped by someone else's actions. Self-worth, Alex now realized, wasn't something he could seek from others. It was something he had to build from within. He had been so focused on fixing the broken pieces of his marriage that he had neglected to fix himself first. But through the pain of betrayal, he had learned that true healing came from reclaiming his own identity, not in the validation of others. One evening, as Alex sat on the porch, looking out at the setting sun, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. The road ahead was uncertain, and the scars of the past would always be there, but he was no longer afraid of them. He had emerged from the ordeal, not as the man he once was, but as someone who had learned the depths of his own strength. He glanced at Emma, who had joined him outside. She sat quietly beside him, a few feet apart, but there was a new understanding between them, one that hadn't existed before. They didn't need to have all the answers. They simply needed to move forward, whatever that meant. "I don't know what the future holds," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I know this. I'll be okay. I'll be more than okay." Emma nodded, her eyes filled with something that resembled hope. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough. "Me too," she replied, her voice barely audible. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Alex and Emma sat in silence. The future was uncertain, but they had both found something valuable in the wreckage of their past, something they could build upon, piece by piece.